It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
First red pill breaking report. Scientists warn of looming threat to U.S. food supply. Quote, it's a huge burden on human health, end quote. That's from MSN.com. The report states scientists are becoming increasingly concerned about food shortages in America, and as expected, climate change is to blame. Let's stop there for the record. There can be no legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost acknowledging and addressing climate intervention operations. Many, many layers to this equation. The MSN report then continues. It has become glaringly apparent that the Earth's atmosphere is changing. That's an understatement. Due to climate change, they say, but what many people don't know, the MSN report states, is that the transformation in the air is also affecting the soil beneath our feet. As the soil changes, food, including fresh produce and meat, is becoming less nutritious, and scientists worry this really could lead to a national and global food shortage in the very near future, end quote. Let's stop there. Not could, not may, not might, is leading to a global food shortage. Billions around the world are already acutely aware of this fact. And above it all, climate intervention operations continue to rage in our skies, wreaking havoc with what's yet left of the planet's remaining life support systems. It's hard to know where to start in regard to responding to this MSN typical climate engineering cover-up report. Yes, our skies and the atmosphere are both indeed changing, radically, not for the better. And it isn't just from officially recognized sources of damage. The glaringly, shockingly, blatantly obvious climate engineering operations in our skies continue to be officially denied by governments around the world and willfully denied by the majority of populations around the world that would rather be lied to than face the truth of what they can so easily see with their own eyes in our skies. When the food shelves empty out, when the taps yield only toxic water, which is largely the case today, if any water at all, in many places there isn't, when the trees are all dead, along with the seas, the insects, the animals, is that what it will take, ultimately, to break the epidemic of programmed normalcy bias, of Stockholm Syndrome, the tidal wave of collapse of everything everywhere all at once, which is already unfolding? Next, UN Food Chief, poorest areas have 0 harvests left. That's from BBC. The report states droughts and flooding have become so common in some of the poorest places on Earth. Imagine that. Climate engineering wouldn't have anything to do with that, would it? That the land can no longer sustain crops. The director of the World Food Programme's Global Office has said some of the most deprived areas have now reached a tipping point of having 0 harvests left as extreme weather was pushing already degraded land beyond any sustainable level. They continue. As a result, parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America are now dependent on humanitarian aid. There's more. Without efforts to reverse land degradation, globally richer countries will also begin to suffer crop failures. 95% of the world's land might become degraded by 2050. That's the case right now. And they always want to pretend it's somewhere off just over the horizon. How many continue to fall for that ploy? And even if it was 20 years out, does that negate us from our responsibility of doing something about it? And it's not 20 years out, I assure you of that. Statistically, mathematically, we are unimaginably close to hitting the wall on so many fronts it would be difficult to quantify them all. The report then states it's going to be disaster for human beings. Pravina Sridhar, Chief Science Officer of environmental group Save Soil, said, quote, it's going to be like Mad Max. There will be no humanity. There will be no charity. There will be no fairness. There will be only survival. Scientists say, the report continues, many extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and intense as a result of climate change. Really? We need a so-called expert to tell us that, and the same so-called expert to make no mention whatsoever of the single greatest climate disruption factor of all, because his paycheck and pension, and perhaps his life, depends on not mentioning climate engineering? And that statement doesn't mean I'm blaming everything on climate engineering. That would not be reasonable or rational in any way, shape, or form. Any and every form of human activity that affects the energy balance of the planet and the planet's life support systems is a part of the problem. How could it possibly be otherwise? It's necessary to look at the entire horizon. It's a this and that equation. All of it needs to be considered. But first and foremost, we need to plug the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, and that is the intentional intervention with the planet's life support systems, primary systems, climate intervention operations, aka weather warfare. Because in the current course, the party's over. In fact, we are all already circling the drain. Welcome to the Bad News Broadcast, now nearing 10 years of nonstop weekly reports without fail. Let's dive further into this week's Bad News breaking reports, and as we do, remember and consider that the hallmark of a truly healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, no matter how dire that truth is. And there are many dire reports in this broadcast, too many to cover in depth. But here's the point. When you hear a headline that you had no idea had happened or is happening, you can then investigate further. Again, that's the point and purpose of this weekly commercial-free non-political report, to trigger investigation of the issues on which our collective futures completely depend, issues which the powers that shouldn't be are doing their best to hide till the moment of impact. Even if we magically had no other threats but, for example, the imploding ozone layer, which is a real reach as we have countless other threats, the ozone depletion problem alone is an extremely near-term existential threat. On that note, from SciTech Daily, ticking time bomb, space junk is eating away at Earth's ozone layer, again, without which we all perish. Let's add this from Splinter.com. Please do not let Elon Musk destroy the ozone layer. For the record, every single rocket launch rips a gaping gash in the already decimated ozone layer in which, again, all of our lives depend. The report continues with this: of more than 8,000 non-debris objects in low Earth orbit, around 6,000 of them are Starlink satellites. The company already has permission to launch another 12,000, the researchers note, and they plan for more than 40,000. Great. Hey, who needs an ozone layer anyway, when you can have constant internet service instead? Who needs a functional planet with a functional ozone layer? Who needs a functional climate and a functional web of life? We have Walmart and McDonald's. And as absurd as that sounds, that summary is far too close to the mindset of so many that are completely comatose at the wheel. And what's doing even more damage to the already failing ozone layer? Climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Geoengineering jet-sprayed atmospheric aerosols that cause ozone layer oxidation and radio frequency microwave transmissions that are used to manipulate the atmospheric particulates and thus weather systems, all of which furthers the decimation to the ozone layer on top of the rocket launches. Please search the ozone destruction section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn more than most want to know. Again, this reminder quote from former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson: "He who controls the weather controls the world." I know many are familiar with that quote. Many new listeners on our radio stations are not. And that's true at least until the world is dead, which will be our near-term destination on the current course. Next, from transformative.com. Has time run out to save ourselves from the climate crisis? Question mark. From that report, there's hope that a window of opportunity remains open, but the statistics tell a different story. Yes, statistics, trajectories do indeed make clear impact is unavoidable and now very near. Worse, at that crossroad, the controllers will play their hand. Populations all over the world are a rapidly increasing liability to them. Is it even remotely rational to believe that they, the money printers, actually want to help us and our posterity to survive and live a bit longer? I think not. Let's blow past some of the details of this report as it's clear where it's heading, and the data-based conclusions are correct. But here's the final excerpt. Quote, "Instability, unrest, chaos. That will be the order of the day. While hardly desirable, it's those types of conditions where revolution becomes a distinct possibility. Maybe amid chaos, we'll be able to forge the system-wide transformation that's so desperately needed." And what is that system-wide transformation? If it's bad for the planet, it's bad for us. How simple can that possibly be? The report then says, either way, the climate crisis is not a future we can save ourselves from. It's a future that began some time ago. End. Yes, exactly. Industrialized, militarized so-called civilization blew through the guardrail at least 2 decades ago, as I have desperately tried to warn about on the record for equally as long. From UCSD, that's the University of San Diego, this headline, Brace for Impact. And I think that title tells it all. Peak impact at full velocity. Again, as I've tried to sound the alarm about for a decade and a half with Geoengineeringwatch.org, and almost a full decade before that. Almost a quarter of a century in all. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world and the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. We must reach a critical mass by starting a conversation on the climate engineering issue that leads people to a credible source of data. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Shirts, hoodies, flyers, cards, all very effective tools to help others awaken to what's happening in our skies. If we can fully expose weather warfare, so many other truths will be forced to the full light of day with it. Here's one to consider. From Slate.com, the climate is the economy. Intensifying hurricanes, floods, and heat waves are wreaking havoc across the country, indeed around the world, and on all of our bank accounts. That's the excerpt from the report. Certainly no arguing that point, and while the controller's scripted political circus rages on in all the mindless debate and discussion of the, quote, economy, how many stop to consider that there is no economic anything on a dead planet? We won't be here. New from the UK Daily Mail, hottest ever June. Heat dome weather will see Americans swelter. Heat dome is in quotes in this report. Hundreds of millions of Americans are set to swelter through 90-degree weather over the coming weeks in what is predicted to be the hottest June ever. That would be the 13th or 14th record-shattering month in a row, all-time record months, one after another after another. Gee, I wonder if there's a trend here. Climate engineering is certainly a part of that, and still the elephant in the sky goes unacknowledged by any official source, any official agency, and the vast majority of the population. They said Thursday of this week, Boston heat index, temperature 107, feels like temperature, heat index. Other locations in New England had heat index temperatures of over 110. Tuesday night of this week, Chicago was 83 degrees at 3 a.m. If we add humidity, and the heat index temperature was likely near 100 at 3 a.m. Think about that. In Chicago at the very start of summer. From the UK Guardian, millions face record high temperatures as heat dome intensifies over US. And as I cover these temperatures, and I realize this is polarizing for many because we all love to hate Al Gore, and the environmental groups have been unimaginably hypocritical, not acknowledging climate engineering. But the truth is this, there's not an old man in a white robe up there in the clouds somewhere adjusting the thermostat so that no matter what we do to the planet, it always stays in a livable range. That's not reality. We are decimating the planet in countless ways in the geologic blink of an eye, climate engineering, the epitome of human insanity. But all of it is a part of the problem. The BBC report then states, while some areas are seeing colder conditions, far more regions are enduring temperatures described as being quite a lot warmer than average. Quite a lot warmer. When heat indexes are reaching 150 degrees or more, that's a combination of ambient temperature and humidity. That's quite a lot warmer than average. No, that's unimaginably above the historical norm, and that's reaching regions or levels that are intolerable to human life. And about the colder conditions, like the snow that just fell in several northwestern U.S. states, that kind of colder conditions that are absolutely caused by chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding, and yet many that claim to be against climate engineering, many who claim to be fighting to expose climate engineering are actually helping to cover up the operations by pretending that the flash chemical cooldowns are just nature, just a sign of global cooling and a coming ice age, they say. What an absurdly mindless narrative to push as the planet hurtles toward total meltdown with geoengineering operations further fueling the fire. On that note, new from theconversation.com, is Earth really getting too hot for people to survive? Question mark. A scientist explains extreme heat and the role of climate change. Eventually, the conversation.com report ends on this note of total hopium. Quote, the good news is that we can substitute clean energy like solar and wind power instead of burning carbon to power the products and services of modern life. End of the excerpt. Yes, the big lie from a so-called expert. Just buy a few solar panels and electric vehicles so that we can all live happily ever after. Total fantasy. Again, this reminder. View the renewable energy documentary Planet of the Humans to find out just how unsustainable so-called renewable energy actually is. And yes, it's better than the straight-up burning of carbon fuels, but it's not sustainable either. As I cover the next report, remember the climate engineers have been manipulating precipitation patterns all over the world for decades, though increasingly broken and out-of-control climate systems are now adding to the havoc. From News 13 Orlando, May was record dry in parts of central Florida, followed by record deluge. Again, drought, deluge scenarios, hallmark of climate intervention operations. Next, an updated report about geoengineering. And as I go through the next few reports, keep in mind it's all smoke and mirrors, designed to divert and distract from the already decades-long geoengineering operations. EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, tight-lipped about new geoengineering research program. That's from Politico.com. One of the nation's most influential environmental groups plans to launch a program that would assess the impacts of reflecting sunlight to slow global warming. The Environmental Defense Fund's solar radiation management research effort is a significant mainstream endorsement of the controversial field also known as solar geoengineering. This is the same EDF whose attorneys told Geoengineering Watch attorneys that they did not want to acknowledge climate engineering because they didn't want to lose their 501c3, and now they're pretending that they're just looking into the issue. But other scientists, the report states, and environmentalists argue solar geoengineering is too dangerous to even study. It could have unintended consequences on the ozone layer, already been over that, and disrupt weather patterns. Earlier this year, EDF convened a private meeting of about 30 scientists, environmentalists, and donors in San Francisco. Again, I went over this in a previous broadcast, but this is an updated report to help set best practices for an expected wave of philanthropic funded studies of solar geoengineering. Let's add this. From Politico.com, flubbed climate test won't deter rich donors from altering the sky. And this from TechnologyReview.com. This London nonprofit is now one of the biggest backers of geoengineering research. The report says a London-based nonprofit is poised to become one of the world's largest financial backers of solar geoengineering research, and it's just one of a growing number of foundations eager to support scientists exploring whether the world could ease climate change by reflecting away more sunlight. The report then states wealthy individuals and foundations have been providing funds for years to solar geoengineering research or policy work or groups that collect funds to do so. Let's add this from harvard.edu, aka Harvard University, the science and ethics of solar geoengineering. Solar geoengineering, they say, is a last-ditch effort to protect Earth from dangerous warming. How's that going so far? And that's enough of those headlines. Again, all mass distraction to try and keep the illusion going. The illusion that climate engineering is just a dangerous proposal that's being considered. And never mind what you can see with your own eyes in the skies that's been occurring for over 3/4 of a century. Go back to sleep. It's just a proposal. And this type of article helps to drive a bigger wedge into society as well, to blame one segment of society toward the other, divide and conquer, and question if the manipulators of the matrix can and are keeping the vast majority completely oblivious to the shockingly visible climate engineering atrocities constantly taking place in our skies. Is it even remotely rational to believe that the same core source of criminal corruption is telling us the truth about the chaos and carnage being carried out in conflict zones all over the world? Short answer, no, but so many so desperately want to cling to the lies. Speaking of which, new from SBSnews.com, quote, the extraordinary record-breaking data that has climate experts baffled. Yes, they're just baffled because none of them have the courage to tell the truth about the single most destructive factor that is breaking the back of the planet's remaining climate functions. Though they have gag orders on them, and though they may lose their job or their paychecks or pensions, that does not excuse them for lying to the population until the brutal bitter end. They need to band together, stand up, show some courage, and tell the truth while it can still make a difference. The SBS report continues with this. New heat records have been set every day since March of 2023. Scientists are confused and concerned about the worrying data. World could be in, quote, uncharted territory by August, they say. Scientists do not yet know why sea surface temperatures have risen so dramatically. The, quote, extraordinary and unexpected phenomenon has concerned the world's climate scientists who fear the severe impacts of global warming are emerging sooner than expected, are worse than expected, and may leave us in, quote, uncharted territory. No, not may leave us in uncharted territory. We are neck deep in it already. This report is yet another example of it's way worse than we thought, and we don't know why. Again, perhaps if the so-called experts looked up and told the truth, that would be a start. From CBC Canada, Environmental Canada says it can now rapidly link high heat weather events to climate change, but no mention of climate engineering, no mention of ionosphere heater facilities that transmit, in the case of HARP, 3.6 million watts of power to the electrically charged ionosphere, creating massive atmospheric heating, which expands the atmosphere up and down. The downward push is a high-pressure heat dome. No mention of any of that. Just label it all as climate change and cover up climate engineering. From Salon.com, climate change linked to brain damage in children and poor kids are at greater risk, the report says. Let's add this. From the UK Guardian, almost 2,000 children die every day from air pollution. That's a very, very conservative figure. How many are being damaged but not necessarily dying? And what's in that air that we're not being told about? When all official air quality reporting reports particles of PM10, 10 microns, at best PM 2.5, by design, nobody even measures for, let alone discloses, the mountain of nanoparticles, the most toxic form of air pollution of all, that are raining down from the skies. So much of it the result of climate intervention operations, which our lab tests, taken over a single state, hundreds of lab tests, extrapolated, indicate somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of these particles are being dispersed in our skies every single year, not a single word, all denied, no matter how obvious these operations are. From Pulse NG News, the gates of hell open in another country as unimaginable heat record is broken. They're talking about Mexico, ambient temperature of 125 plus, heat index likely well over 150, and they say Mexico water riots result. Let's add this. From AP News, riots erupt in drought-stricken central Algeria over months of water shortages. When you turn off the spigot, you stop food production, and you destabilize that nation. Again, Lyndon Johnson, he who controls the weather controls the world. The AP News report says violent riots erupted in drought-stricken Algerian desert city last weekend after months of water shortages left taps running dry and forced residents to stand in line to access water for their households. News about the tensions has spread on social media, but garnered little news coverage. That's because we're watching political circus in the U.S., non-stop political circus. It's like watching some sort of Hunger Games movie with the total absurdities created by the power structure being aired on every single channel available. They say where many papers and television stations rely on advertising revenue from the state, they don't want to show anything negative, right? Look the other way. Press freedom in the country of Algeria has increasingly been curtailed, and in recent years, journalists have been imprisoned. Nothing new about that. Let's ask Julian Assange. Let's ask John Carrico, the U.S. official whistleblower on the illegal U.S. torture program, So Much for Freedom and Democracy, and who was the only one to go to jail? John Carrico. Next, water wars are unfolding around the world. Question, how many Americans are more worried about keeping the golf course green? That's the world we live in. Back to meltdown. Earlier this week from the UK Guardian, more than 550 pilgrims die in Mecca as temperatures exceed 50 degrees C. Add the heat index, likely 130 or 40 feels like temperature. And later this week, let's add this from NDTV.com, the death toll from the heat continued to rise. At least 1,000 die in scorching heat during pilgrimage. These are just small samples from around the world. It's happening everywhere. If it's not a major event like the pilgrimage, it simply doesn't get reported, swept under the rug. But if it is a major event like the Olympics, it does get reported. From the UK Guardian, athletes warn hottest games on record could threaten lives at Paris Olympics. Report says intense heat forecast for competition could lead to athletes collapsing or, in a worst-case scenario, dying in competition. Also from the UK Guardian, Indian engineers warn of prolonged blackouts amid searing heat wave. That's just the beginning for power shutdowns. But Sarah Palin had a suggestion, right? Drill, baby, drill. That'll fix everything. Right, Sarah? Not so much. From MSN, the world is using more oil, coal, and gas than ever before and will use more. Net zero is dead. Not that net zero ever meant anything, but we are clearly digging a very deep hole, and all of us will fall in it on the current course. They say the human race is using more carbon-intensive fuels than it ever has before and is set to use more and more going forward. The so-called green energy transition, the report says, simply isn't happening. That's an understatement. What's green about a 900-foot tall wind turbine? Tell me what's green about that. It has a very limited lifespan. If the optimal wind speed is cut in half, it produces 1/8 of its rated power output. If the wind speed is doubled, it produces nothing because you have to shut it down to keep it from blowing apart. And we have solar radiation management operations blocking direct sunlight, which is absolutely necessary for a solar panel to work. When you block direct sunlight, you can diminish solar power output by 80-90%. That's what got me into this battle in the first place. Losing that much power from whatever these aircraft were emitting, which I knew absolutely positively was not just condensation. This is many years ago, but that's what got me into this battle. That's all recorded in the Dimming documentary, available on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. But about all the carbon fuel, again, over 100 million barrels of hydrocarbon a day, 26 million tons of coal a day, cutting down the forest. How could people think that doesn't have an effect? I really can't fathom that. And claiming that is to alienate so many that we need to focus on climate engineering. We need to build bridges, not to burn them. It's not hard to acknowledge we've been extremely poor stewards of the planet. That being said, let's focus on the intentional intervention with Earth's life support systems. If we can expose and stop that, we can start to look at the rest. But about all the drilling and burning, hey, it takes a hell of a lot of jet fuel to keep those geoengineering jets spraying in our skies, right? Drill, baby, drill. What a great idea. Thanks, Sarah Palin. But with all the heat, what about this? From NBC, Montana. Winter storm warnings issued. Snow moving in tonight. This is early in the week, Monday. And the coldest nighttime low in the entire multi-stage region with snow warnings was 36 degrees. That's weird, isn't it? Doesn't it snow at 32? Not anymore. It can snow at 40, 45. Seen it snow at 45 here in my location on the east side of Lake Shasta. Seen other weather reports showing snow at 50 degrees, now becoming the norm, and nobody notices. Nobody notices the 4-inch hail falling everywhere, no matter how hot it is. Massive amounts of hail that literally make it look like the middle of a Arctic snowstorm when it's all said and done. Vehicles locked up, hail 2 feet thick, and nobody questions anything. This report then says the other snow warnings in the region had low temps of 30s and 40s, high 30s and 40s. How can that be? Why is it snowing at those temperatures? Welcome to patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations, aka chemical cool down, aka winter weather warfare. And why is geoengineeringwatch.org the only source that's trying to bring that issue to light? Because it doesn't fit the ideology of the false conclusions from so many that want desperately to believe we're, quote, entering an ice age while the planet is hurtling into total meltdown. We need to stand on solid ground, credible ground, or we will not be able to move this fight forward. Let's add this from Weather Channel. Wild West, snow aims for northern Rockies as wildfire danger lingers to the south. They say summer starts up this week, but Old Man Winter will visit parts of the interior Northwest as cool air and snow move into the region. Further south, the pattern will contribute to a persistent wildfire danger and record temperatures. Old Man Winter? Really? The so-called experts are now nothing more than moralist matrix minions that hide climate engineering by calling it Old Man Winter. Chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations is Old Man Winter. Here's a question. What's Old Man Winter doing in the Arctic, for example? From ecowatch.com, record low sea ice in Hudson Bay putting polar bears at risk of extinction. How many sources and sites jumped up and down ranting there's more polar bears than ever, there's more ice than ever? It's total nonsense. And about the ice, it's being grossly underreported. The ice extent in the Arctic is now considered to be any region of sea ice that's 15% slush or more. Slush won't hold up a polar bear. And if it's 15% slush, it's still 85% ocean, isn't it? Statistical falsification. And what about the mass, the volume of the ice? Record low. And chemical ice nucleation operations are occurring there. That's why you get ice on ocean temperatures, sometimes as high as 40 plus degrees, as was the case in Boston Harbor some years ago, recorded by geoengineeringwatch.org, 40 plus degree sea temperatures. And for those that don't know, sea ice freezes at 28.2 degrees, something in that range. How can there be ice on 40 plus degree seawater temperature regions? Chemical ice nucleation. That's how. Please learn about it. Go to the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Let's add this from the Hindustan Times. Record low snow over Hindu Kush, aka the Himalayas, risk to over 600 million in Ganga Basin. The report says the exceedingly low snow cover this year will have a massive implication for communities downstream. Yes, it will. The cryosphere is disappearing everywhere, except for those flash chemical cool downs sometimes in the beginning of summer while the rest of the world is in total meltdown. Shouldn't that cause people to scratch their heads just a bit? Shouldn't the constant hail everywhere cause the same? What's wrong? Why are insurance companies now suddenly canceling for hail anything because it's happening everywhere all the time and no one questions it? Search Lake Michigan ice balls. Take a look at those pictures, and those are happening all over. 75-pound spherical balls covering the shores of Lake Michigan when they're nucleating that body of water. How many red flags do we need? And next, if you thought the Colorado River problem was over due to the last 2 years of climate engineering contaminated rains and chemical ice nucleated snows in parts of the West, think again. From CNN, a water war is looming between Mexico and the U.S. Neither side will win. They say the conflict underscores the immense difficulties of navigating how to share shrinking water resources in a hotter, drier world. Farmers in the Rio Grande, the report says, of Texas are either out of water or running out of water quickly. That's just one location. There are many, many more. In regard to the chemically nucleated frozen material, it tends to sublimate. What's that mean? It means much of it transitions from a solid to a gas, bypassing the liquid phase. What's another example of chemically frozen material that completely sublimates? Dry ice. No liquid comes off dry ice. Not as much runoff of chemically nucleated frozen material that we now call snow that comes in so many forms: grapple, little round styrofoam looking balls, giant cotton ball looking things, sticks to trees, collapses them because the trees are now completely weak. They have no tensile strength in the branches because the roots are being exposed to contaminated precipitation that kills soil microbiome. In the case of aluminum, the root systems sense this toxin, they shut down nutrient uptake, and the tree dries slowly from the bottom up. That's why the root balls are smaller, weaker. That's why so many trees are blowing over every time there's a stiff wind, and there's much more stiff wind because they're manipulating pressure zones to add to the endothermic reacting elements that they're seeding into clouds. This is just like, again, an atmospheric evaporative cooler. And they are using the winds for that. That's why there's wind almost all the time. Straight line winds with all these events. All part of the same equation, all connected to climate engineering. Speaking of which, back to the chemical ice nucleating part and the sublimation part, let's add this from MSN.com. California water update: snow not enough to counter losses, study warns. They say California and other states in the Southwest have been in the grips of a mega drought since the dawn of the millennium as a result of climate change. Despite several snow-heavy winters in California, the snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas has not managed to cure the state of its dry soils, according to a new paper in the Journal of Geophysical Research Letters. Sublimation. Not enough runoff from chemically frozen material, and that runoff is itself toxic. Is there any silver lining to this equation? No. There's an aluminum lining, also strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, graphene, but no silver lining. No. Interfering with the climate in any way always has been, is, and always will be catastrophic. Such operations are not benevolent. They never have been. It's about power and control, period. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 463, June 22nd, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of covert climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recording of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour broadcast can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. Geoengineering Watch wishes to express our deepest gratitude to those that have helped us to expand our reach and thus our voice in this desperate last hour effort to sound the alarm. If you're on our email list, please put us us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. Now with over 15 million views on YouTube in spite of drastic, draconian social media censorship. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up. Here's one way: by starting the conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials, which can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high-quality printed materials with shocking images. We provide the printed materials for less than our overall cost of producing and shipping. We now have Geoengineering Watch hoodies and Geoengineering Watch shirts. Both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Again, reaching a critical mass of awareness on this issue is the only way forward in this fight. If we can expose it, we can stop it from the inside out. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send your photo to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. And to all those that are steadfastly committed to this must-win fight, I am so grateful to you and for you. I want to express my deepest and most profound gratitude. It's our collective efforts that can absolutely still make a difference, even at this late hour. Moving on from Science Publication PMC, PubMed Central. Aluminum toxicity and forest decline. Also part of what brought me into this fight, watching the forest die around me. As this toxicity has killed soil microbiome, so much metal is falling in our rain that it has changed soil pH values in this normally acidic soil region. And I have the historical USDA baselines that I got from a contact in USDA. I have them in my possession. We've seen soil alkalinity changes here up to 10 times toward alkaline, from 5.4, 5.6 to 6.6, 6.8. That's how much loading in the rain has occurred. How can these organisms adapt to this? Answer: they can't. Every single fir tree in western forests is in some stage of decline or death, and other species are not far behind. But maybe the geoengineers just don't like California, right? Maybe they're hitting with extra hard doses here, and though we do get hit very hard because the weather systems come in from the west, we're not alone. It's happening all over the world. Let's add this from the BangorDailyNews.com. Maine is preparing for a future without its iconic pines. The health of the iconic evergreen trees that define the pine tree state is at risk from climate change. Is that what it's at risk of? Because, for the record, the laws of physics make clear that on a warming planet, it must rain more overall, not less. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. Based on unfiltered frontline data, we are likely past 3.5 C of warming right now. And yes, those higher evaporation rates mean that some regions will dry out faster as well, but there must be more overall rain. If there's not, there's a factor we're not being told about. That factor is climate engineering. And when they omit that from a report like this, that the rain is toxic everywhere, all over the world, proven by hundreds of lab tests, proven by peer-reviewed science study, every drop of rain contaminated, when they don't even include that and make a blanket statement, it's just from, quote, climate change, that's criminal. That's criminal omission. Send somebody at the Bangor Daily News a link to The Dimming. Maybe they need to rethink what it means to be a journalist. From the dailysabah.com, wildfire grips, this is from Turkey, by the way, wildfire grips 7 provinces in Turkey amid heat waves everywhere. Forest fires are reported in 7 provinces across Turkey this week as the country is experiencing a severe heat wave. The heat waves are everywhere, except near the Pacific Northwest when you get snow in summer. From mongabay.com, burning wood is not a renewable energy. We have all the dead trees, so I wanted to report on this. So why do policymakers pretend it is? And how many fires, because there's such corruptions, are allowed to burn to kill the forest so they can do salvage logging, and somebody's making money off that? There's other layers too as well, by the way. If you search this title, Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda, there's so many layers to this, and too many people have been trained to think it's this or that. You're either on the blue team or the red team. The world isn't that simple. They say the UK's Drax, this is the so-called renewable wood-burning energy production, targets forests in California. So are they going to burn more forest now so they have more salvage logging so they can implement this, quote, renewable energy, which absolutely isn't? From India Today, more on the heat. Bats drop dead from trees in India due to extreme heat wave. Remember the flying foxes in Australia and the monkeys in Mexico? All these miraculous creatures dying from excessive heat. We're next on the current course. From Oregon State University, Pacific Coast gray whales have gotten 13% shorter in the past 20 to 30 years, an Oregon State study finds. If the same trend were to happen in humans, that would be like the height of the average American woman shrinking from 5 feet 4 inches to 4 feet 8 inches. We'd probably notice that, wouldn't we, over the course of 20 years? Certainly that's not nature doing anything that quick, is it? The smaller size, they say, could have major consequences for the health and reproductive success of the affected whales, and also raises alarm bells about the state of the food web in which they coexist. You think it might cause some consequences if American women suddenly shrunk to 4 feet 8 inches on average? And of course the food web is collapsing. There's no could, may, might. It has collapsed. That's why fisheries are shut down. That's why salmon fisheries shut down, and we disappeared 10 billion snow crabs that nobody even talks about anymore. The entire ocean ecosystem is collapsing. Seas die, we die. Simple. On that note, from CBS, Connecticut-sized dead zone is expected to emerge in Gulf of Mexico, potentially killing marine life. Potentially killing? Nothing lives in a dead zone, hypoxic and anoxic, low and no oxygen. And for the record, there's over 500 of these dead zones right now. And they're just now acting like this is something new. On the subject of the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, the whole Gulf soon, how are things going down in the so-called sunshine state of Florida? Well, now it's, quote, mostly sunny thanks to solar radiation management operations. Yes, Florida. 100-plus degree ocean temperatures in the summer, dead coral, dead fish, hydrogen sulfide emitting, rotting, decaying, sargassum seaweed on the beaches, and let's not forget that pesky flesh-eating bacteria that's been showing up there. Anyway, about Florida. From Scientific American, Vermont will be hotter than Miami this week. Blame the heat dome. High pressure, ionosphere heater-induced heat dome. Please look up what an ionosphere heater can do and ignore the official narrative that it's just a benign research tool. Nothing to see here. So Vermont, hotter than Miami, but not for long. The high-pressure heat dome pendulum will be making the rounds. Everybody will get their dose. And that heat dome also causes thermal expansion over the oceans that adds to the rising ocean levels due to melting land-based ice. And now, often at high tides, you have flooding. Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and islands like the Maldives are definitely doomed in the very near term. And for those that don't know, sea level rise is not uniform. Depends on factors like the thermal expansion in certain regions, seafloor topography, many variables. But to deny that it's happening right now is someone who simply has done no research and is reading some sort of political blog that tells them what they want to hear. We need to get past that. We need to have a desire to find the truth, not someone who will lie to us and tell us what we want to hear. Bouncing back to other parts of the world, and as I cover these headlines, keep in mind the hallmarks of climate intervention operations: epic drought, deluge scenarios, unprecedented heat domes, on and on. And that is not to say that without climate engineering we wouldn't have problems. We would. We have, again, been horrific stewards of planet Earth. What it is to say is that climate engineering can augment or diminish any of these scenarios at will. Climate engineering is the crown jewel weapon of the controllers, the weapon with which they can bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault. It's a complex equation, not just of this or that. But there's no legitimate discussion about climate or weather anything without first and foremost addressing climate intervention operations. Let's start with this. The Times of India. Heat waves more than double of normal this year. From phys.org, rural India runs dry as thirsty megacity Mumbai sucks water. Far from the gleaming high-rises of India's financial capital of Mumbai, impoverished villages and areas supplying the megacity's water are running dry. A crisis repeated across the country that experts say foreshadows terrifying problems. Yes, it does. Mad Max on an unimaginable scale. 1.4 plus billion people in India, somewhere in that range. From the UK Independent, heat warning scaled up in Delhi, India, as longest ever heat wave continues, and it's barely summer. The red alert warns of extremely high likelihood of heat stroke and heat illness for all ages. Sunday, this last week, also marked the 35th consecutive day when the city's maximum temperature exceeded 40 degrees C. During that period, hundreds of heat strokes deaths were reported. Again, for the record, we're up to 560 plus consecutive months globally with above normal temperatures. And that, quote, normal temperature is not normal. They take an ever more recent 30-year bracket, which is ever hotter, which means it's not normal, not compared to pre-industrial temperatures, not normal at all. It simply helps to hide the true severity of damage done to the planet. From thewatchers.org, crops failing as heat wave and extreme drought intensify in central and northern China. The heat wave and drought are expected to continue to intensify. An extreme drought warning is also in effect. The provincial government limited water for the service sector to ensure adequate supplies for irrigation. Plans are being made for artificial rain production to increase the efforts. Whenever you cause rain to fall one place, it didn't make it where it was going. How simple is that? You can't rob Peter to pay Paul in this equation, and they're totally disrupting the hydrological cycle, destroying the ozone layer, contaminating virtually everything on the planet. Yeah, what a great idea. From the UK Guardian, flooding hits China's south, temperatures sizzle everywhere else. Radical extremes, the hallmark of climate intervention operations. China's National Meteorological Center issued an alert for high temperatures as multiple regions across the country experienced sweltering heat, while many southern provinces issued severe flood warnings due to heavy rains. Wouldn't imagine any of this is going on, would we, while we're watching nonstop controller scripted political idiocy on every mainstream station. From the Watchers News, this state of catastrophe in Chile after floods. Brazil, Chile, so many other countries we never hear about. Hail falling everywhere. Massive hailstorm just hit Italy as well. Didn't hear anything about that on any mainstream news here. From Erie.com, how about that contamination, as in Lake Erie? When in doubt, stay out. That's the headline. Department of Health warns of harmful algae blooms in Lake Erie. And the summer is just starting. It's just starting. Freshwater bodies are completely imploding. The contamination, the heating, and they're also deoxygenating. Goodbye to freshwater fish in so many bodies of water. Not that you want to eat it anyway. It's all toxic. From the KansasReflector.com, a time for reckoning. Kansas farmers brace for water cuts to save Ocala aquifer. After decades of local irrigation, Kansas lawmakers are pushing for big changes in irrigation. Had this in Idaho, covered that last week, and the potato farmers. Quote, we all understand that we're sucking water out of a bathtub, and the rate we're taking it out of the bathtub exceeds the rate Mother Nature can put it back. Many people don't understand that some of these aquifers are literally left over from the Ice Age. They don't recharge in any time frame that matters. Keep that in mind. From Nature.com, global groundwater warming due to climate change. I can state this firsthand. The temperature from my groundwater well where I live on the east side of Lake Shasta has increased dramatically over the last 20 years. That does not bode well. From thehindu.com, groundwater is heating up. Another confirmation of this, threatening life below and above the surface. Under your feet lies the world's biggest reservoir. Groundwater makes up a whopping 97% of all usable fresh water. Think about that. How many take that for granted? Just keep pumping till it's all gone. And who cares about how toxic the water falling from the sky is and that it won't recharge many of these aquifers? Nobody considers that. Total unsustainability. That's the mantra for industrialized, militarized civilization. Completely unsustainable and full speed until total implosion. From DWTV Germany, record 120 million people displaced globally. UN report, that's gross underestimation on that report. And on the subject of thinning the herd, from CNN, Japan reports record spike in potentially deadly bacterial infection. I wonder what all those 400 plus biolabs, level 4 biolabs around the world are manufacturing. What do you think? Let's add this from MSN.com. New report sheds light on health emergency as disease sweeps through India. That's interesting. Just 2 reports. There's many more. But those 400 plus biolabs all over the world are doing something, aren't they? Are these labs connected to the pathogens that keep popping up all over the world? You decide. Back to India. Consider the following message pinned by a citizen of India. Rituparna Chatterjee lives in NCR, the National Capital Region of India. She states the following. I don't think people elsewhere fully grasp what's happening in NCR and just how hot it is. At 7 a.m., the tap water is boiling hot. The sun hurts the eye. There's no nighttime anymore. For 24 hours, the temperature feels above 40 degrees C. That's about 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit at night. She continues, which means during the night, the water is hot. Every surface is hot to the touch. The human body can't endure a heat wave this nonstop without respite. She continues, air conditioners are running nonstop, but rooms are barely cool. Houseplants are dying. You have to water them with boiling water, struggling to breathe in the thick, scalding air. The skin feels like it's on fire because there's a minimal sweating here. You can't drink any water. That's not in a fridge. Water stored in the bathroom in buckets needs hours to cool down to room temperature before bathing is even possible. You can't step out in the streets. The early morning yoga classes are mostly gone where I live because it's near 40 degrees C again at 6 a.m. Some of us residents in high-rises are storing extra bottles of cold water and packets of ice the domestic workers can take home. But I can't imagine, she says, how dreadful it is for people without any privilege, the poor and the homeless, those who can't afford even a cooler, and animals on the streets. A plant that covered my entire balcony like a carpet of dark green died. The palm is shriveling up. Both were in the shade. You can have a couple of days, she says, of 47 to 50 degrees C heat. You can't have relentless 10 days with no rain, no end in sight, no end to the heat. And I fear this is how we will live from now on. And governments will do nothing because of capitalist greed. Because the super rich, she says, when they're done cutting down all the trees, flying in private jets, building ugly hotels in sensitive ecosystems, mining, displacing indigenous people, when they have nothing left to exploit, they will move their families to colder places and settle there. Good luck with that. She finishes with this. In the 90s and 2000s, we'd sleep on the floor in summers. Here in India, now, you can't lie down on the floor even at night. It feels like a gas burner is on underneath it. Question, how many first world nations have any clue about what others in faraway lands are enduring? Not just deadly heat or lack of water and lack of food, but orchestrated conflict and carnage. Not enough know, and even less seem to care. Lastly, consider this, new from the UK Guardian, that asks, what if there was just no solution? Question mark. Then they say, how are we all in denial about the climate crisis? Let's stop there and add this question. How can the vast majority still deny the shockingly obvious climate engineering atrocities taking place in our skies? How can there be any legitimate discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare? There can't be. This issue must be addressed first. In summary, industrialized, militarized so-called societies and those who live in them have been trained, taught, and programmed from their birth to blindly believe in official narratives and to deeply fear their own mortality, so much so that eyes wide shut is the norm for the vast majority, a form of religion of willful ignorance and deep denial. Reality aversion syndrome would be a term that fits the underlying worldwide epidemic that is the foundational factor which has allowed an endless list of insanity to unfold and accelerate to terminal velocity. I never wanted this battle. I never wanted this post, but it's the one I was given. It's my obligation to man it until the end. Each of us, all of us, are essential in the effort to sound the alarm, all with a part to play. We need only to be willing. Fear is a choice. Courage in the face of fear is also a choice. Unshakable solace comes with knowing that whatever you faced, you stood for what was right, for the good of the whole, for the protection of creation on which all of our lives completely depend. In my past, during the course of many long-distance endurance events, for what seemed like an eternity of hours in these events, every fiber of my body would want to stop, to end the hurt, to rest. But inside, there was always the knowing that I would deeply regret yielding. There was always the knowing that I would never regret persevering to the finish line. I never gave up during that chapter of my life, not once, and nor will I now. Each of us, all of us, have the same choice to make in the most important battle of all, for everything that we hold dear, for all that matters, literally. Please march with us in this all-important battle to expose the totality of the threat posed by what's occurring in our skies. And if, by our collective efforts, we could do this, we would cause a shockwave around the world. We would alter the equation in the right direction, even at this late hour, and so many other truths, so many other crimes of the controllers would come to light as a result. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific details on how you can make your voice heard in this must-win battle. Please make every day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.